Welcome to the Capitalist Corner. I'm Michael Liebowitz, and as you can see, I am once again all on my own, but I think we'll be able to handle it, especially with the audience's help. But as usual, the views expressed in this show are not necessarily indicative of those of the American Capitalist Party, although your hosts are respectively, I am the vice chairman of the American Capitalist Party, Mark Pellegrino, of course, is the chairperson of the American Capitalist Party. He is unfortunately conspicuous again by his absence today. I hope he can join us, but I'm doubtful of that. He's very busy. He has a career that requires him to travel all around the globe. So we've got a lot to talk about today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, share from YouTube to your favorite platforms. And also remember to check out my podcast, The Rational Egoist. I think it's pretty spectacular. And as Mark says, it will raise your IQ. So we'll just dive right in here today. Nicole Hingel's question: given that long-term dependency on government welfare disincentivizes work, how can the government phase out those programs, allowing time for the private sector to absorb the need? Well, that is a complex question, Nicole, and I'm not positive or even highly confident that I have the correct answer. What I would say is that the government could make an announcement, that these programs will be phased out in the near future, whatever it's going to be, and then tamp down benefits, as they go along and ultimately go to a completely private economy. Now, there may be better ways to do that. That would require experts on the subject, of which I am not one. But I hope that answers your question. And now, Gary Menard, great Gary, says, can you guys address the stark difference a capitalist government would look like compared to the brazen, open, I dare say, presidentially celebrated corruption going on right before our eyes? He says, specifically yesterday, the $1 million gift by Tim Cook to Trump. Gary, unfortunately, I'm not aware of that gift. I didn't see it in my morning readings, but the main difference, and this is the key, Gary, and everybody else listening, is ultimately it's dependent upon we the people, right? We have to hold our governments accountable. It doesn't matter if you call your government a capitalist government, a constitutional republic, democracy, whatever. If the people are not going to hold them accountable, then it is just, ripe for corruption. And so that's what we need to focus on, I think, is to have the population develop the proper values, the proper political philosophy, the proper broader philosophy. And then we can begin to hold these politicians accountable to that. Right now, you obviously have entrenched interests in Washington, local governments, and there's the people seem to, I don't want to say they're okay with it, but they don't seem to want to do anything about it. Trump, of course, is beloved by his followers. It doesn't matter what he does. He once said that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they would still support him. And he's probably correct. But ultimately, once all that was established, Gary, once the populace has the proper philosophy, is willing to hold their officials accountable, then you would see a government that was strictly limited to the protections of the life, liberty, and property of its citizenry. And when a government is held within its proper bounds, there are far less favors to be bought from them. I had a conversation decades ago when John McCain was running against George W. Bush in the Republican primary in 2000, and McCain was pushing for campaign finance reform. And I thought it was ridiculous that the answer that McCain came up with was to restrict the liberties of the American people to give money, when the solution to me is restrict the power of government to grant favors. Because if the government doesn't have that power, then there's no incentive to give them the money. So that would be my solution. But Gary, if you want to either send me an article or type it up about, on the screen here, what happened with Tim Cook yesterday, because I really am unaware of it. Let's see if we've got any more questions coming through here. If not, I will. Ian Gilmore says, any interest in talking about the January 6th defendant who yelled, kill them? about the people guarding the Congress and is not senior at the DOJ. Ian, that's something else. I did not see that in my stack of readings for this morning. Does sound interesting. I am not a big defender of those who, whether you want to call it a riot or an insurrection or anything else on January 6th. I'm not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of the pardons. I'm not in favor of Donald Trump's behavior on that day at all. Let's see. Rock says, why are communists or the left generally anti-Christian, but capitalists or the right are generally pro-Christian when Christianity promotes sacrifice? The short answer, Rock, is I do not know. I don't even know that the assumption is true. Marxists, I know, are anti-Christian. Marx, of course, famously said that religion is the opiate of the masses. But there's also Christian socialists that are out there. There's, Islamic socialists. So I don't know if that assumption is true. On the right, the Christians that support capitalism, I think that kind of stems from where these ideas rose up, right? So Christianity, although it started in the East or the Mid East, it spread toward the Western ideas through Rome, through Britain, and the Enlightenment did also. So I think that a lot of people tended to adopt both the ideas of the Enlightenment and Christianity, as contradictory as they may be, and we can see that those contradictions within the American Constitution, the blatant altruistic stuff that's in there, the reference to God in the Declaration of Independence, for instance. And so I think in America, the country that was largely founded on the ideals of enlightenment, unfortunately, we also have that strong Christian influence as well. I don't think that capitalism is consistent with Christianity. I really do not think it is. I think there's plenty of strong arguments against the two being compatible. All you have to do is look at the type of characteristics necessary to make it in a free market and juxtapose them with the Beatitudes. So that's my answer to that, Rock. I hope it was satisfactory. Let's see. We got anything else? So Deeper with Diego says communists are explicitly atheist because they wrest the power from the clergy into the government directly. They skip the middleman. They don't need a God to be in charge. Manu says, what are your thoughts about Trump inserting himself in South American politics and also thinking about sending military to stop cartels, which brings me to a story I read about this morning in this very thing. I thought it was absolutely reprehensible and disgusting that after, if we look at the war on drugs, let's say it started with the Harrison Narcotics Act. That I think was in 1914, I want to say. Let me look this up real quick. But the Harrison Narcotics Act was really the first federal drug law that was passed. And if you look at the results that have taken place as a result of this war on drugs, let me see when it first came out. 1914. Yes, I was correct. So 1914, you're talking about 111 years of this nonsense. It's, and instead of stopping it, instead of learning the lessons in terms of, the gang wars on our streets, the overdoses that stem from impurities in the drug, the families wrecked by people going to prison, the fact that people who are drug addicts, they can't support themselves because the exorbitant costs of their addiction, they end up stealing, robbing, the prostitution that results from this thing. And the idea that this president wants to ramp this up, I've thought was absolutely disgusting from the get-go. And not only that, but you're now treating law enforcement as a military operation. This president seems to believe that all that it takes to solve any problem on earth is his whim and the power to back it. And it's simply not the case. You're not going to stop the war, drug use, because there's a demand for drugs. Doesn't mean being addicted to drugs or even using drugs like heroin or crack or LSD and things of that nature are good, but it ought to be up to the individuals to do these things. And we certainly should not be waging war. And there's an interesting thing because a lot of libertarians endorsed Trump because of his promise to pardon Ross Ulbricht, who went to jail for running the Silk Road website, which helped to facilitate drug sales. So these libertarians endorsed Trump because they wanted Ross out of jail. But now what about all the people that are going to be hurt on the flip side because Trump's ramping up the war on drugs? It's just more inconsistency, both on the part of Trump and those who support him. Rock says, does democracy and the Constitution become its own worst enemy when the culture wants authoritarianism? And aside from persuasion, can anything be done to prevent this? Rock, my answer is, unfortunately, I don't think anything can be done about it. Ultimately, even if you had a minority of people that were willing to rise up against the government, and take up arms against the government, then they would have to, if the vast majority of the population wants authoritarianism, now you're going to have to subdue them with force, and you're going to have to use the very principles and the very tactics and strategies that you've been opposing in trying to establish a constitutional republic that promotes capitalism. So, unfortunately, I think persuasion is the only legitimate route. We have to continue to do it. We have to continue to try. It's difficult, and it's certainly an uphill battle. But I have to tell you that in my personal experience, when I've had time to actually engage people and people who will actually read, literature on capitalism, people are generally persuaded. Now, I don't have the time that I've had in the past to actually engage people on an individual basis to where that happens, but we do have this show, and we can come out here and we can make our arguments. We can continue to do so. We can point people in the right direction to read books like Henry Hazlitt's Economics, or they can read Capitalism, the Owner and Ideal by Ayn Rand, Frederick Bastiat's The Law. There are plenty of materials out there that can help to persuade folks to come along to our way. Kat Sterling asks, what's the stance on mandatory vaccines for babies, children, not the flu vax, big ones like polio, MMR, etc.? I can only answer this for myself, Kat, and my particular stance on this is, I think that parents who don't vaccinate their children are very unwise. I think that they ought to vaccinate their children. I think that this idea that's come about that these vaccines are not the saving, life-saving inventions that they are, and now it's that they're created by the diabolical to rob us blind, and they're just destroying us. I think that that's absolutely atrocious. But nevertheless, I think that ultimately medical decisions should be made by parents. I don't think the government should be stepping in to make that decision for them. I certainly don't think the government should be using force to, make people do that. And Ian Gilmore says those are only mandatory for school attendance. They are not mandated in general. Well, that's another problem with having public schools, because now you have public schools. You're forcing my kids. Well, I don't have any, but if I did, you're forcing my kids to go to school with other kids. And if those kids are unvaccinated, they represent a risk. And, there's the argument, well, if my kids are vaccinated, then there really is no risk. But vaccinations are not 100% accurate. So if there are unvaccinated kids carrying the infectious diseases, and the vaccine isn't working up to par for some kid that got the vaccine, that kid could get it. So that leads to a lot of these moral problems, is the fact that we have public education rather than have it private, which is what we ought to be doing. Deeper with Diego says, in Florida, you can have a baby with 0 vaccinations and you can homeschool entirely without state interference, 100%, no gimmick. Manu says religion is something individual. An economic system has nothing to do with that, and vice versa. That's how I see it. Thank you, Manu, for your. Oh, and Manu, by the way, thank you for the article you sent me. It's rather long. I've heard of the author before. It's. I was hoping it was going to be short so I could read it and discuss about it. Discuss it on the show today. Unfortunately, I can't do it because I didn't have time to read it, but I will get to it. Remind me, please, because if I don't get to something right away, I get overwhelmed with other stuff. But if you remind me, I will read the article. What would be the negative consequence of a dictatorship that dictates that the protection of individual rights can't be compromised on, and that the state's only role is to protect them? Well, first of all, for a dictator to have that kind of power, I'm very skeptical that dictator would stay in that position, that he would maintain a defend rights only sort of attitude. And it would also, in that case, depend on that particular dictator's understanding of individual rights. And there's a lot of border cases, and that he would have to enforce, age of consent, property, intellectual property, that kind of thing. How many members are going to sit on a jury, things of that nature. So there is still room for what's the word I'm looking for here? There's still stuff that's up to opinions, and that type of stuff generally, I think, is best decided by the majority. But if the majority is woefully irrational, then you have a problem. Aside from that, you'd have to ultimately, you couldn't let people vote, because the people would vote that stuff out. So now you're using force to prevent people from voting. Ultimately, I just think that it would end up being a disaster. Of course, I mean, we could imagine a world where we would have the benevolent dictator who is the rights protector. But if the majority of people are against it, it's simply not sustainable. I don't believe an equilibrium could be arrived at under those circumstances. You are very welcome, Bonnie Bertrand. Thank you, Bonnie, for tuning in every day. Well, you normally tune in. I don't know if you're here every day, but I think you are. Either way, thank you for tuning in, Bonnie. Let me see what we got here for stories from today. Okay, I went to the wrong place. I'm sorry. So there's a new Gaza plan. I really wish Mark was here to discuss the Gaza plan, where Israel is going to occupy the Gaza Strip. They say they have no plans to establish a permanent government there, but they do want to occupy it. Curious. Let everybody know, or everybody let me know your thoughts on this. Actually, Rock says, couldn't people still vote, but within the constraint of individual rights? Well, Rock, think of it this way, right? Say, let's obviously I have to make up a hypothetical number. Let's say 80% of the population opposes your individual rights government. The idea that you're going to suppress those 80% of the people is really just naive in my view. What are you going to do? So suppose those 80%, they want to start having secret meetings, and they're going to start talking about rising up against your dictatorship. And now what type of means are you going to employ to stop that from happening? Are we going to be wiretapping, pulling people over, for instance, when they're driving, or preventing large meetings? It's simply just not a sustainable thing. If you don't have the majority behind you, or at least a very, very passionate minority that's close to a majority, it's just not sustainable, especially with the amount of freedoms that you would have in a rights-respecting society. People can go where they want, talk to whom they want, buy guns, for instance. I mean, what kind of tests are we going to put on gun ownership, on self-defense? It'd be a very difficult thing to do, and I think ultimately unsustainable. So while I don't think democracy is the standard of right and wrong, I do think that convincing enough people to sustain a rights protecting government is necessary. So the Gaza plan, I'm interested to know what people think of that. So this is an interesting story today. came from Axios, and it's all about MAGA and how excited they are about arrests. And I frequently see this online. We want arrests. We want arrests. They want, the people from the Obama administration arrested. What do you guys think about that? To me, first of all, I think I've never come across a bigger liar in politics than Donald Trump, ever. So while people will say they all lie, I think that may be true, but it also blurs a very big distinction with the amount he lies. He also has had a propensity his entire life to, every time things don't go his way, to claim that there's a conspiracy against him, things are rigged against him, which makes me skeptical about any claims he makes. You also have, these new, intelligence documents that are supposed to be so revealing, but they don't really reveal much. They don't point to a grand conspiracy to go against Trump. You know what I mean? So eh, eh, I don't know exactly what they're going to be arrested for, as Race just says. The problem is it's much like this Epstein case. Is you've had Trump pushing bullshit, and you've got a whole, information ecosphere of MAGA influencers who push this shit. So the people who only listen to that really believe that there was this grand conspiracy on the part of the Obama administration. They're trying to keep Trump down, the deep state's involved, and all this stuff. Now, does that mean that I think that there was no weaponization of the justice system? No, of course not. Here's the thing. Two things can be true. The arrests of Donald Trump, the investigations into Donald Trump, could be politically motivated. And at the same time, Trump could have been doing things wrong. And I think both of those are true. I think it's much like if you think about football. I've heard it said that if the refs really wanted to, they could call holding on every play. That would make for a very interesting football game, however. So they only go after the most egregious holdings. I think it's similar in politics. Is if you were to look into the backgrounds of a lot of politicians and do the investigations, you would then find things that they were doing that were illegally. In this case, they did it to Trump. And I think that he was doing stuff that was illegal. Now, whether this rose to such a great, height as to justify arresting him, trying him, that's a different argument. But I mean, look, he did take home documents he wasn't supposed to have. He did refuse to turn those documents over. That's a fact. He did try to subvert the results of the 2020 election. The election was not stolen from him. So to try to push this narrative that all these people were doing such horrible things to keep the Donald down that rise to the level of putting the Justice Department against them, I think it's a case of always accuse your enemy of what you yourself are doing. I mean, look, Donald Trump's son did meet with Russians, right? That's unequivocal. That happened. Trump has shown deference to Putin in the past. That's true. Trump did say, give us more information, right? Right. So he actually spilled Israeli intelligence right in front of the Russians. I believe it was in the Oval Office. So it's not like this stuff just came out of nowhere. We know the Russians did try to interfere in the election, although they didn't achieve what they wanted. So when you throw all this stuff out there, suspicions do rise. Now, I never thought that Trump was colluding with the Russians, and I'm not going to say that the investigation was justified or not. But nevertheless, I do not think that there was a criminal conspiracy directed at the Donald. I am curious to know what you think. Ray says, pretty sure Obama, as bad as he is, never sexually abused anyone. In 2023, Trump was proven to have done that in civil court alongside a defamation charge. Both of those are hard to prove. You're absolutely correct, Race. And then when you combine that with things that Donald Trump has said about his daughter Ivanka, that he'd be dating her, and how hot she is, and talking about his infant daughter and whether she's going to have large breasts, and talking about grabbing women by the genitals, and how he used the fact that he was the owner of the beauty pageants as an excuse to go into their dressing rooms. These are all very seedy things that he's said. And then when you combine that with all the accusations, I mean, I don't know, like it seems pretty obvious to me, the old saying, if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. Ian Gilmore says there was a multi-year investigation into the claims that Obama, etc., did anything wrong, run by John Durham. It failed to find anything. And I'm pretty sure that any legitimate investigation is going to fail that. My concern is that Trump is just surrounding himself and appointing nothing but sycophants, right? Like the case where you have the Labor Department head recently fired, right? The person in charge of the labor statistics. That creates the incentive for people to lie to you. And if people know that they can only work for Donald Trump if they tell him what he wants to hear, then you're going to find people that are going to tell him what he wants to hear. Hopefully nobody ends up in jail undeservedly. But that does concern me. Ian Gilmore, I like Ian. I love your commentary, by the way. So keep it coming. You're very well informed on this subject in particular. I've noticed. But Ian says, like many other things, this has been a memory hold by Republicans as if it never happened. Well, the thing is, Ian, is that whenever they don't get the result they want, they just attribute it to some sort of corruption on somebody else's behalf. So, if there's no Epstein list, that's because somebody's corrupt. That's just, there's got to be the list somewhere. And since they're not seeing it, it's corruption. So when the Durham report fails to produce anything, it's corrupt. When Bill Barr comes out and says, look, there was no interference in the election. I mean, Biden didn't rig the election. Trump actually lost the election. All of a sudden, Barr is no good. He's just, influenced by the deep state. Diana Rosamagno, my girlfriend, who I guess is up now, and that's good. Remember, you have an appointment at 1, and now I don't have to wake you, so that's great. But we have Labubus coming today. Is that how the Labubas? I don't know. It's pronounced some way that I don't know. What the hell is a Labubba? I've seen these things. It seems kind of silly to me, but if people like them, that's on them. And Lee says Mark is too busy fighting people on Twitter to be on the show today. Is he out? Is he on Twitter right now fighting? If he is, we might have an issue. Let me go check. That's what I love about these phones. This is like crazy. I never in my life would have thought I'd have something like this. Let's see. Well, Mark is on Twitter. There's no doubt about that. Let's give Mark Pellegrino a little bit of hell. Well, he hasn't posted in an hour, and maybe he's just taking a break. We can forgive Mark. Mark does such great things for this show, for capitalism, and for the American Capitalist Party. I think we can cut him some slack. I'm hard on him, but he is pretty freaking wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him tomorrow because I always have fun when I'm with Mark. Now I forgot what the hell I was going to say. Oh, remember now, like and share this show and and I've been noticing there's been a dearth of comments now at the actual YouTube site. Go, and Lee just dimed out Mark that he tweeted 30 seconds ago. Mark, somebody tweet to Mark and tell him to get his ass on the show. Okay. Ian says he could be on an airplane and still post. Oh, that might be true. I don't know, but Katie says exactly. I don't know what's happening there, but just like, share, and subscribe. Share from YouTube to your social media sites and go to the YouTube station and leave your comments. The audience is great today, by the way. You people are freaking fantastic. That is awesome. Manu, you always have good things to say also. I shouldn't do that, right? Like if I compliment someone, then everyone else thinks they're left out. I don't know. Okay. Lee just tweeted Mark, which I think is great. Let me see what else we got for stories. What do you think? So there's this plan, right? Trump is having a problem with the governor of Illinois because they've got this. I don't even know how to. This is so ridiculous. There's this thing. Okay, there's this Brandon Road Interbasin project. It's a $1 billion effort involving Illinois, Michigan, and the federal government that's aimed at preventing Asian carp from entering the Great Lakes. And evidently, I don't know, this governor of Illinois, Trump saying he's not helping, whatever. But here's the bottom line. Is it the goddamn government's job to stop the carp from coming to the Great Lakes? I mean, I read this and it seems so freaking ridiculous to me that the government of the United States of America is focused on keeping carp out of the Great Lakes. Does anybody else think that's nuts? Does anybody? I mean, come on. Katie says Mark is tweeting. It doesn't mean he's in a place to be on camera. Katie, he can come on the show and not be on camera. So we're not going to buy that as an excuse. I'm sorry. Again, I'm not mad at him. He's very busy, but that just doesn't cut the mustard. Is it cut the mustard or cut the mustard? Can someone tell me? Either way, what do you guys think about this carp? Nicole Hingle says that's nutty. My girlfriend says no one wants the carp in their lakes. No, but then do something about it. Why does the government got to steal people's money to pay to keep the carp out of the lakes? That is, I don't know, Lee. I don't know, but I don't know what muster is either. So I don't know why you would cut either. But I want to talk about these lakes. Why is it the government's job? The government, in order to do this, has to, first of all, go and tax people. Then they've got to pay people, hire people, whatever. It's not the freaking government's business to keep the carp out of the lakes. This is something that I just don't know, folks. I just don't know. But nobody seems to care about my being pissed at the carp. So Greg Doherty says the government has destroyed private mechanisms for dealing with issues such as carp. See, this is what Von Mises talked about, Greg, is that every freaking intervention and regulation just begets more regulations, more interventions. And that's what happens. But I have to say that the solution is to stop regulating, stop interfering. Let's cut back on these things. Jason Adams says, until we establish private wildlife fishing rights, the gaming department runs it. Yes, we need to roll back on that. We need to cut that shit out, get the government out of the way, and allow private industries to take care of it. Let's see here. That's okay. That's got nothing to do with anything. Okay, so they've got quite the conversation here going on in the chat that has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on the show. So, that's cool. I guess I'll have to find another story here. So the unemployment claims rose for the second straight week. Is somebody else going to get fired as a result of this? I don't know. It's certainly possible. I listened to a great podcast this morning. I like Sam Harris. I disagree with Sam Harris very, very often, but I find his takes to be reasonable and measured. And even when I disagree with him, I find that he comes with a good argument. I find that he's intellectually honest. So I like him. And I listened to him today interview somebody else that I like, although the other person I also disagree with frequently, and that's Jonah Goldberg. But I find them both to be honest, and I think that's very important. And they were discussing the Trump doctrine and basically how, they compared it to postmodernism. They compared it to romanticism. They talked about Trump basically going by his feelings. He thinks that his feelings are indicators of truth. I thought it was very, 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 very good. Very good podcast. I highly recommend it with Jonah Goldberg and Sam Harris. Ian Gilmore says, how hard is it to get people to come on your channel since you are fairly small? There are lots of interesting people like from the Bulwark or Penn Jillette. That would be great. We could get people on, I'm sure, Ian. The problem that I have, to be perfectly honest, is time constraints, right? Because I'll tell you in a second, Manu. So I have to book guests for my own show, The Rational Egoist. And then I have to prepare for those interviews, and that takes time. Oftentimes they'll send me books, and I have to read full length books just to prepare for the interview. So I have to do that. Then I have to also prepare for this show, which consumes quite a bit of time. I also have to edit the clips that I get from Persephone. I have to submit them to CapCut so I can, make them appear clearer, enhance the voice, things of that nature. Then I have to distribute those on social media 4 times a day. I also have to make my comments on social media. I also have my daydream, and I have a girlfriend who does want some, me to spend some time with her, and I want to spend some time. So then on top of that, to go and find somebody that can appear on this show, which it's not the same as when I get them on my show, because when it's on my show, I can prepare all the questions ahead of time. I know what the conversation is going to get. But if I go reach out to somebody, let's say I reach out to Phil Magnus. I say, Phil, would you be willing to come on the show Wednesday, whatever the hell Wednesday's date's going to be, August 13th. But then I'd have to have Mark prepare for that and me prepare. We'd have to coordinate that and then get Phil on that, on the show at that time. That would take a lot more time. So it's really a time issue. I'm trying to get my mind right so that I can sort of coordinate all these things. And I'm really hoping to be able to do that. But you also have to remember, too, that some of these people are going to come on and they're not necessarily going to agree with Mark and I, even if they are, capitalists broadly, they still may disagree. But when I interview people on my show, unless I tell them ahead of time, I don't debate with them. So I will allow people to come on. They come on the show, on my show, and if they disagree with me, I won't correct them unless I tell them ahead of time we're going to debate. I just go with the discussion, because I'm not trying to play gotcha. I'm not trying to upset guests without warning them ahead of time. I'm not, going for a sneak attack unless they just say something that's so out of whack that I feel I have to, because the audience would think I'd lost my marbles if I didn't correct it, then I will. But if we brought somebody on this show who's not prepared for that, and all of a sudden they throw something out there that we just have to disagree with, now that person feels ambushed, and that's something else I don't want to do. Oh, Ian says he actually meant my own channel. Oh, thanks, Ian. I'm sorry. I just went on a 15-minute rant for no reason at all because I misunderstood your question. I apologize. I am constantly reaching out to new people to come on the show. Penn Jillette would be a very difficult get, unfortunately. He is, even finding his email address, because that's how I normally go about getting guests. I just look for email addresses. And when I find them, I'll email them, and, they'll get back to me or they won't. But somebody like Penn Jillette, I don't even know if I would be able to find him. Lee would like to come on The Rational Egoist. Lee, you want to come on the show. You are going to have to present me with a topic or topics that you would like to discuss. Because, Lee, however much I may like you, and you are certainly a very nice person, I am an egoist, and I'm only bringing people on the show that are going to raise the IQs of those that listen, that are bringing interesting topics. So, Lee, if you have a good topic you think you're capable of coming on and discussing, then by all means, go ahead. Ian says, I wonder if Teller would be easier. Well, he'd actually have to talk, Ian, right? Deeper with Diego says, it's crazy to say in public that you'd want to come on the Rational Egoist. Why would that be crazy, Diego, for somebody to say that? I don't understand. Lee, you're not being bullied. All right, listen, you guys got to come with some questions, because I am out of shit to talk about. You got to remember, I've now already done more talking than I usually do, because we're 38 minutes into the show. That's well beyond the halfway point. And normally I have Mark and I go back and forth. The guy on my mug is my best friend, Brent McCall. He and I were cellmates in prison for 11 years, friends in prison for 5 years before that, still friends to this day. I think it's a travesty that he is still in prison, and I eventually will try to get him out of prison. Not that I'm not trying now, but I'm hoping to eventually get him out. Not I'll eventually try. Diana says the carp pose a significant threat to the existing ecosystem. These invasive fish are voracious eaters, and they would go sick in the Great Lakes. I think somebody has just Googled something about these carp. Diana, we are going to have to recommend Julian Simon to Diana Rosamanu. Diana, I would like for you to order yourself a copy of The Ultimate Resource 2 by Julian Simon. and see what he says about this kind of thing. I mean, ultimately, it's not the government's job to protect the ecosystem, and these claims about the ecosystem are very much overblown often. Subby thinks he has something interesting to say. I disagree, even though I love him. It doesn't matter. He wants to point out that I didn't know who was on the cup when I first got out of prison. But you have to understand something. The context is totally different. I've never seen Brent outside of prison. This picture is an outside of prison picture. He's also significantly younger than he was when I met him. And I wasn't expecting to see him on a cup. Lee, Katie Ellis, what is your question? I didn't see it. I'm sorry. I've got a lot of excuses is what I've got. Let me see if I can find it. If I don't, just post it. Repost the question. Have you considered reaching out to Inductia? He's an objectivist trying to bring back induction into physics. Thanks for reminding me, Race. He and I are follow each other on Twitter, and I am considering reaching out to him. He and I have both been I don't know what the hell the word is, by this existent university guy. He and I were both I don't even want to say criticized, because criticize is too dignified of a word to use for that. So Katie, I cannot find your question. Please repost it and I will answer it. I promise. Even if I don't like the question, I'll answer it anyways. So Robert Naser says something must be done. I don't know about what. Chris says, if the government's job is not to protect the ecosystem, what is its job then? The government's job is to protect the individual rights of the American citizenry, the right to maintain one's own life, to pursue one's own happiness, and to accumulate whatever property one can earn. Now, if somebody, if there's a case where somebody is blasting some kind of toxin onto their neighbor's property, that's then a case could be made. But protecting the Great Lakes from the carp is not within that scope. Existence University is alive and well in his comment section. I'm sure he is. That guy's a jackass. Holy Christ. All right. Well, Katie, if you are not going to come and ask this question of yours, I am going to cut this short. So I'm going to give you a minute or two, not even 30 seconds there it is. With Medicaid and SNAP benefits regulations being changed to require people to work a certain amount of hours, what are your thoughts? Should they still do away with it? Absolutely, they should do away with it. Ultimately, those programs are dependent on stealing from some people to provide benefits to others. Those absolutely should be, they should be eliminated. Not right away, but yes, they should. Chris says, does your definition of individual also include future generations? The short answer is no. It doesn't. It's not the government's job to make sure that the planet is sustainable for another 1,000 years or whatever. But then you'd have to get into the real question, the real debatable stuff is, for instance, what is the effect of this carp? And let me just tell you, if you go back and you look at the predictions of the doomsayers, going back time immemorial, they are more often wrong than they are right. And we ought not to be curbing the individual rights of existing citizens and existing human beings based on the off chance that some future generation is going to suffer based on what happens today. So that's my answer to that, Chris. I mean, I would just point to, go look at the famous bet between Julian Simon and the ecologist Paul Ulrich. Julian won on all counts, but it didn't matter. Paul's still out there making his predictions, or was the last time I knew. I can read, Lee. Are you for school choice as an incremental approach to weakening public schools? Ryan Lopez says that's the literal pool. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what pool Ryan's discussing. Anne wants to know, so this question, are you for school choice as an incremental approach to weakening public schools? I am. I think that if the government is going to take people's money anyway, to pay for education, those people ought to be able to send their children to schools that they want to send them to. That said, and I think that if they're doing that, I think competition is better than no competition. I also don't think that you can just, in one fell swoop, deprive all kinds of kids who are dependent on public education and just take it from them and say, here, go have your way with it after we've forced this system upon you. I'm open to other ideas, to better ideas on how to do it, but that's just one that's out there. I don't, Ryan Lopez. I'm sorry, I don't know the context in which you're talking about this. Okay. Wildlife control. This is what it is. So, Ryan says that's what insurance is. I can pay into it for 40 years and never go to a doctor. That's the literal pool. Yeah, I know, Ryan. I'm sorry because I just don't know the context of your discussion. Come back, Ryan. I really would like to hear it. What you say, but in the case of the drivers and the insurance, is it ought to be the choice of the person whether or not to get insurance. That the insurance should not be imposed on you. If the roads were private, as they should be, then it would be up to the private road owners whether to require drivers to have insurance. Then people would know if they're using that road, other drivers aren't insured. A lot of this stuff is mucked up by the fact that the government is involved in things in which it should not be involved. Nicole Hingle has a personal question. I remember you said once when you were at a supernatural convention, you felt threatened. What was that about? I never went to a supernatural convention, and I've never felt threatened at any convention that I went to. Mark was terrified of Annabelle. I was not at all. There was a guy once who I didn't know if he was actually threatening Mark or if he was pretending, and it turned out he was pretending, but I wasn't too concerned about it. So I don't know. I don't think I've said that, Nicole. I think maybe you misunderstood. Gar Blimey, Ryan Lopez. I'm with you. Ryan, please come back. You can follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and you can tell me your broader point. And I'd be happy to, discuss it with you. Not even at Pork Fest with the Liberty bathhouse. No, did not feel threatened in the Liberty House at Pork Fest race. I showered in prison, so I didn't feel threatened then either. All right. I'm going to wrap it up early today, and I guess my capitalist thought of the day is going to be about effort in leaving one's comfort zone. Oh, wait, my news question. What's your take on the idea from Moral Tribes about creating a meta morality for society? I don't know what you mean. I've never heard of that before. I don't think anybody's ought to be creating a morality for society. I think morality is something to be discovered, not created. Okay, no more questions. Now I'm going to get to my capitalist thought of the day. So when I come on a show and I have a guest, it's a much easier enterprise than doing this, than talking by myself. Doing this is really coming out of my comfort zone. It's difficult. I have to be able to talk for 45 minutes, at least. I'd like to be able to do an hour, but ultimately I run out of things to say. Nonetheless, the effort is worth it. And the more I do it, the more comfortable I become doing it. And I think I'm putting on a good program, and I plan on putting on an even better program moving forward as I continue to learn. That's what life is like, and that's what freedom is ultimately like, is that under freedom, you have to take risks, you have to put forth the effort, and you have to keep getting better. And when you fail, and you will, you learn from the failure, you move on, you grow, and you keep getting better. And I think this show is getting better, whether it's just me, Mark and Jim Valiant and me. And the audience is certainly getting better. And I, for one, really appreciate you. So remember, share from YouTube to your favorite platforms. Subscribe if you haven't already. Go to AmericanCapitalistParty.org and also check out my show, The Rational egoist. All right, folks. Thank you very much. We will see you in 71 hours in some change. Until then, in honor of the great Mark Pellegrino, remember to always check your premises.